honestly on a systematic basis to making sure that people always feel like they can say what they mean.
Yeah.
So we have, listening systems like Pecan, and, we really train managers to read every single comment, respond with grace, take the feedback, offer to have a conversation. We really want to have an environment where people feel like they can chime in.
Nice.
And so, diversity plus psychological safety hopefully equals innovation.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by Daniel Ills, who's the Vice President of People at Vinted, the world's largest marketplace for secondhand fashion. During the episode, Daniel shares the skills and capabilities you need to lead across different borders and cultures, the key strategies for effectively leading remote teams, and the top qualities and skills to look for when hiring senior executives. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Daniel, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
You're the first guest
Amazing.
in the studio. No pressure.
Fantastic. Looking forward to this.
How are things? How's life?
Good. Very good. It's somewhat stressful week. We're going through a budgeting process, which is
Fun times.
always fun, but I can't complain.
Nice. People can probably hear by your accent that you're not from the UK. Tell everyone a little bit more about your background and your journey to where we are now.
Sure. So I'm Hungarian originally. I moved to London when I was 18. On and off, I've been here since. I did spend 2 years in the US.
Mm-hmm.
I worked, I started my career as a lawyer. I did that for 3 years, didn't love it. Yeah.
Wow.
So I practiced corporate law for 3 years.
You're like, nah, this is not for me.
That's exactly what happened. And I did a total 180, and I joined Lyft, which at the time was still pretty small. And I worked in a sort of generalist business role there, which was super fun, loved it. Continued this kind of commercial business development, general business journey for a couple of years. Ultimately, was part of the founding team at Drover, which is a London-based startup, now acquired by Kazoo.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really there that I fell in love with people. So within the founding team, I was sort of naturally the one most drawn to the problems that kind of the people discipline deals with. And I sort of started getting involved solving these problems, and I just realized that
that's my spot. That's where I need.
Yeah, and I just thought, holy cow! I had this epiphany that this is what I wanted to do with my career, and I kind of grew that company, that team, and ultimately exited and landed at Vinted. So that's a journey.
Wow, I was going to ask you because I've stalked you a little bit on LinkedIn, and I saw the company, and I was like, how did this next step to CPO happen? So when you kind of sat down with the other founders, you realized, actually, this is where I feel like I can best serve the business.
Absolutely. That's exactly what happened.
I'm sure they were like, go for it.
Yeah, that's precisely what happened. So I kind of fired myself from every other job that I had within the company. So I replaced myself with people much better suited to doing a marketing leadership role, a sales leadership role, etc. And I just sort of focused all of my attention on people.
Nice.
And that's what happened.
What did you think HR was before versus going into it after? You must have had a preconception of this is what being a HR leader is. Now you know what you know now. What did you think it was, and now what do you realize it is?
Yeah, well, if you asked me 10 years ago if I would be doing this job, I would have said no. It was not even on my radar. And I think that is a bit sad because HR still gets, or at least used to, I think perhaps now it's changing, which is a great thing, but it used to get a bad rap.
Yeah.
I think people I give an onboarding presentation to folks who join Vinted every 2 weeks. And one of the things I reference is sort of, the HR characters from pop culture, like Toby from HR or In the Office or like the crazy lady in the Office Christmas party movie, and how there's all these stereotypes exist about what HR is, and it's so much more than that. And I do genuinely think that we do stuff that makes business possible. It's the biggest for a lot of tech companies, especially payroll is by far the biggest cost.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's the idea that you don't want to be managing that part of your your OpEx in a strategic way is mind blowing to me. So so I think I've definitely my opinion has changed radically since that time.
That's good to hear that. But we have made a lot of progress, like you just said. But the fact that you still have to have that conversation means we're not there yet.
Yeah, I hear you.
No marketing, finance. They don't have to explain. This is who we are.
Sure.
This is what we do. This is the value we bring. But we still, unfortunately, have to have that conversation and explain this is the role of HR.
But I do feel it's changed hugely. I mean, not least since there's been a lot more analytical rigor that's kind of popped up in the space, and I am confident that more and more really smart people choose this career path.
Well, I think it was highlighted the value during the pandemic. All of a sudden, every business looked towards the HR team and was like, what do we do?
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly right.
Right. And all of a sudden, HR was kind of in the spotlight. And some people rose to the occasion and some didn't. I saw many HR leaders retire during or get let go actually. And then others completely thrive and were like, we were waiting for this moment. This is our moment, right? And got the investment, and they continued they're continuing the momentum now, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely.
As well, so I feel like there's never been a better time.
Completely agree.
To be in this space. Given your background, you've worked across multiple countries, regions, cultures. I'd love to dive into some of your learnings there. I'm sure you learned some things the hard way across them. How can leaders develop that sort of cultural intelligence and sensitivity they need to lead across multiple cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'll tell you my story of kind of landing at Vinted and the sort of things that I've experienced there. So I'm Hungarian, like I said. It's an Eastern European country. I was joining a company HQ'd in Lithuania. So I thought to myself, you know what? I mean, I can probably handle this. I mean, how different can this be culturally? I think a lot of folks from Western Europe might have a hard time understanding the culture, but surely I can handle this. I mean, this can't be too distant from what I'm used to. And boy, I was wrong. So I think that's maybe the first lesson. Don't assume anything. So you can have two countries right next to each other with actually really quite distant cultures. And
give me an example of something that you were like, that you thought one thing and we were like, actually, no, this isn't.
Yeah. So celebrating success. So when I first sort of landed, one of the things I wanted to put in place within my team, so I wanted to reinvigorate my team a little bit and sort of get folks really engaged with our culture and our values. And one of the things I try to put in place within the people team, this is kind of like a values recognition program where, basically peers can recognize each other for doing really well and acting in line with one of our values, and then kind of talking about this publicly and celebrating these success stories. And there was just a tremendous pushback, and which was shocking to me because I feel like this kind of program is such a standard thing to do in the UK. And I had definitely seen it in most companies I had been involved in the past. There's just this like, really, no way, we can't do this here. This is really not us. What about the other people who are also doing a good job? Why are we not recognizing them? We're a team. We're not you shouldn't be thought of as individual success stories.
This is just within your HR team.
Yeah, this is just in a people team. But I mean, I'm pretty sure if we tried across the board, it might get similar pushback. But so that was the first thing that kind of made me think, you know what? There's something different. There's something different going on here. So that was the first thing I really noticed. The second thing was, if you want to hear the story of that, was around decision making. Yeah. So I noticed that when it came to decisions at Vinted, there was always a bit of a pause. Like everyone just sort of, rather than trying to move fast, which was kind of my style, had this urge to ask other people, get folks involved, socialize your ideas, get that stakeholder. I know that they've been thinking about this problem. Let's get them in the room as well. You'd end up with big meetings, lots of people. long discussions for my liking. I was just like, how do we ever get anything done here if this is how we make decisions? We try to get to consensus on everything. And then I sort of started reading up about decision making as a cultural nuance, and turns out that the UK, the US, countries where I'm much more I'm more used to working with, and in fact Hungary are more top-down decision-making countries, meaning
you make a decision, you don't really...
Yes, so managers will typically consult their teams, but ultimately they're really expected to take decisive action, right? So in countries which are leaning toward consensus decisions, there's an expectation for the boss to kind of drive alignment in the room. And I just thought that, that cannot be great. But, and I think this is a very important but, I've really evolved on this point. So what I've learned is that while making decisions in a consensus-leaning culture takes longer, so the upfront investment is higher.
Yeah.
When you get to decision and you start implementing something,
faster,
way faster, and you gain back so much, all of that investment and more, because everyone is totally aligned. No one's kind of cutting side deals, finding loopholes and back doors to kind of get out of that decision. Everyone is rowing in the same direction, and actually, you get to the same result, if not a better result. So, I guess maybe the lesson from that for listeners is humility. I think a lot of people come into cultural challenges with a lot of, maybe ego is not the right word, but feeling like they know better, feeling like their way is the right way, and that's, I think, the knee-jerk reaction. I think it's just dangerous to do that. Really, there's good reason why these nuances exist, and the world runs in different ways, and so have humility and accept that this way might be just as good and better. It's just different.
I've had the same thing with me and Shane, because when we first started the company, we were just making quick decisions because we were just starting the business. We wanted to move quickly, and a perfect example which matches what you said, when we went to the first lockdown, we lost 80-90% of our revenue because of events, and we were trying to figure out how to pivot as a business. And rather than making a decision, we actually brought the whole team in and said, these are some of the ideas we have, but we basically agreed that before we went into the meeting, me and Shane agreed that whatever the group consensus is, we'll go with. And like, to your point, I didn't have to explain it to them why it's valuable, what it means for them. They're immediately engaged. They're immediately bought in because they're part of the process. Right. And then and within a few weeks, we had completely pivoted the business to digital. Everyone knew the role that they play, the why, and it was just like lightning.
Totally.
Whereas if me and Shane would have came in that room and said, this is what we're doing, this is the direction we're going in, and didn't really clearly communicate what that means for each of them, we would have spent weeks, maybe months, trying to push that process.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
I do think it does depend on what level of decision we're talking about.
Sure.
So not every day. I'm not doing that every day for every single decision. Otherwise, it'd be like, well, but those are big, important. Talking, companies who are going through mergers, for example, or their digital transformation, or they're implementing a new program or piece of software. Those are the moments where you need to involve as many people up front as possible, and you save it on the back end in terms of the implementation, like you said,
completely,
which is really the hard part.
Yeah, completely. And I'll say that no company, no team, I think, gets this perfectly right. Everyone sort of tends one end toward one end of the spectrum, and I think it's just, as a leader, it's about challenging yourself to say, okay, are we doing this right? Are we sort of how can we have an even better balance between speed and alignment?
How have you had to adapt your communication and leadership style as well to the different populations and cultures that you serve and where your employees live?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think in particular, when it comes to, communication-wise, just tremendous clarity. Again, cultures can exist in the sort of low context sphere and the high context sphere. Some cultures require you to say exactly what you mean. Other cultures work by implication to some extent. And so, if you want to do this well across cultures, I think you're best off not leaving anything up to interpretation, because you might lose some of the colleagues in the kind of... And then the other thing is, in particular, in my case, it was stakeholder management. So because of this kind of consensus leading decision culture, so much of the job is storytelling, is getting buy-in on the why for why you're trying to introduce a change. It's bringing folks along that journey with you. And so I've invested a ton of time into kind of getting that piece of the puzzle right.
Yeah.
Which, perhaps I emphasized less in the past.
I'm sure, I know we're going to talk about this a bit more later, but I know this must also be something you take into consideration in your hiring process then.
Yeah.
As those are some of the skills that those leaders need to possess to work in this organization to be a good fit.
100%.
Storytelling is a perfect example.
100%. And I really think that, so we really double down on that as we search for leaders. And to be honest, anyone, but particular leaders. And I would say that's only become even more prevalent and important since COVID. Yeah. Because I think if you're naturally not the strongest relationship builder or stakeholder manager, in person, you kind of figure it out. People have just more empathy for each other, in my experience. In person, and you kind of work it out, you shake hands, you sort of get it done. When you kind of don't have that in-person element, I think it's just harder to build trust.
It's tough.
And the work that you need to do to get buy-in, to get folks on board, is just so much harder. And I think, we really need leaders that are up for that challenge.
Before we jump into sort of leading remote, because that's definitely something I want to talk about, how do you leverage the diversity across those multiple cultures in terms of how that comes into the play in terms of innovation in the business, diversity of thoughts, perspectives? Is that something that you've focused on harnessing across the different cultures?
For sure. I mean, I don't know if we kind of emphasize cultural differences as a way to harness it. I think we just generally, as a culture, really, really fight for psychological safety. So it's a really key tenet, I would say, of
so people can bring their thoughts, ideas, perspectives.
Absolutely.
They understand. Well, to be honest, you kind of mentioned it earlier, right? The fact that you're involving them in the conversations, you're already going to get that diversity of thought, perspectives, and that's going to filter down into the product. Yeah,
we pay genuinely tremendous attention to, and honestly on a systematic basis, to making sure that people always feel like they can say what they mean.
Yeah.
So we have, listening systems like Pecan, and we really train managers to read every single comment, respond with grace, take the feedback, offer to have a conversation. We really want to have an environment where people feel like they can chime in.
Nice.
And so, diversity plus psychological safety hopefully equals innovation. So that's the thinking.
Love it. So moving on to sort of managing remote teams, all of us have been adapting to this new way of leading and managing, and I feel like what it meant to be a manager or leader has changed significantly. What are some of the sort of key strategies that you and the team have implemented to lead remote teams effectively?
Look, I think leading teams remotely is actually kind of the same as leading teams in person, just amping up some of the behaviors that make you successful in one versus the other. So, which I think, like, how you manage stakeholders and how much time and care and effort you invest into bringing folks on the journey with you is a good example of, is the same behavior, but you just do it in more care, more emphasis. I think similar thing when it comes to just being aware that remote work for your team is hard. It can have an adverse impact on their mental health. It can be lonely. And so just onboarding them with extra care, really checking in with them.
What's that look like practically? Give us an example of how you do that.
I just think it's time. It's time of day. It's checking in with folks. It's actively, messaging them on Slack when you have nothing else to say other than how are you? And how's your day going? And who have you met so far? What are your first impressions? What's
It's hard to
working
do that
well.
though when they're not visible in front of you. So
Absolutely.
have you designed any like systems or prompts or nudges to give those? Because as managers and leaders, we're already busy as it is, right? And
Yeah.
because they're not in our field of view, we don't see them in an office. It's quite hard to be like,
Yeah.
oh, have I checked in with Ivan today to see how he is? I think that's one of the challenges.
Yeah, I don't have a silver bullet kind of solution there. I'm sure that someone techier than me has figured it out, but
Yeah.
I just think it's just about for me personally, it's just about reminding yourself like you've got to pay attention to this. Folks need that kind of check-in. I think another piece here, and this depends on the size of the sort of function that you lead or team that you lead. I do think that leaders should be visible. And so if you're in person, it's easy to be visible because you're there, and people see you. You host meetings, etc. In a remote leadership role, I think you've got to be a whole lot more intentional about how you achieve that visibility. So I think in part it's how you set up your comms infrastructure.
So how would you do that? You mean like virtual town halls?
Yeah, exactly.
No,
So
like-
I think you've got to have that. So you've got to have these virtual all hands or town halls where you have an opportunity to be visible and to talk to your team. I've experimented with other ways as well because I'm not sure that's enough, to be honest. I think what I've been doing as well is things like long form content. If I have an offsite with the executive team, for example, people might be wondering how that went in my team. So I do a write up on that and I'll share that on Slack. Or, we're doing, we wrap up budgeting and people are wondering sort of how that process went, how I feel about it. I think they're interested in.
You start a podcast.
Yeah. And so people have sort of given me the feedback of doing, instead of these write-ups, like, why don't you do video messages? And I should do that, but I think I'm scared of doing that. So I'm kind of not.
Because I think you're going to get more engagement. People, it's easier to consume.
Yeah,
Audio,
I know.
You're doing a great job now. So I don't know why you're scared of doing it. Actually, will save you time as well. Having to write it down, in my experience, having to write it out versus saying it and just having a conversation.
Totally.
Because then you're not kind of editing too much and having to do it. And then people can either listen. If it's audio, they can just listen or they can watch and consume it.
I think I'll get there. Not there yet, but I'm getting there. So yeah, but that's another, I would say, key thing. And then maybe this last thing is, as you hire your team, again, just really pay attention to, even more than you did before, to are they values aligned? Are they going to be good at building relationships? Because in a distributed remote context, all of that is just so much harder.
How do you assess for that?
Well, I think you look for empathy to begin with. So that's something I do. And how do I look for empathy? I think one way I do that is just listen to how they tell their story, or a story of something that they know a lot about and I may not.
Yeah.
Because I find that when people have a lot of empathy for the person they're talking to, they're going to be careful about using abbreviations. They're going to be careful about
the words they use,
using sort of turns of phrase that I may not know, because they've thought about the fact that I don't know that. If they don't, and they kind of focus on their story and not kind of the listener.
There's a lack of empathy there.
I mean, that's just one way, but I think
sure.
over time you get you
can feel it sometimes though in the conversations, right? Like even if you haven't got a specific question, like you said, during conversations you can pick it up.
Yeah.
As the example that you just said. What about your own team? How, like you're leading a remote people team. Walk us through, like, what does your day look like? How often are you checking in with each of your team members? How do you communicate? Because I'm sure many of your peers are listening right now are leading similar remote HR teams. They could probably get to hear how you do it.
Yeah, sure. So I usually, I have a leadership team meeting with my direct team, plus a handful of folks, which is really the leadership of the function, once a week. And we take our time. So it's scheduled for 2 hours. We don't always fill up the 2 hours, but we do want to give each other the time of day. Once
How many people are on that roughly?
I want to say 7.
7. That's a core people team.
It's the core sort of senior leaders of the team.
Mm-hmm.
that's one sort of important block of the week.
What does that look like though?
Yeah.
How do you map out that meeting to make sure you get
So
what
it's
you
very
need and set
structured,
agendas?
which I guess brings me back to the point about sort of how to lead remotely. So we do have a very kind of pretty clear structures in a meeting, which is to some extent based on Patrick Lencioni's The Advantage and sort of their line of thinking around how to do meetings right. We've kind of adapted it to our needs a little bit, but in a nutshell, we do a lightning round, which is like 3 sort of things top of mind for you this week.
You start with that.
Can be work or personal, and it's just to kind of have an idea about what your week is looking like, and some people may have follow-up questions, and we, if it requires discussion, we stick it in the agenda. We build the agenda in advance, so people are
you already know you're not spending 20-30 minutes talking about why are we here.
Exactly. So we build the agenda in advance, which usually,
do you build it in advance from the week before or just throughout the week?
Throughout the week.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's supposed to be complete. Sort of. I mean, we can still add things to it during the lightning round, but it's supposed to have a pretty good skeleton there by the end, by the beginning of the day. And there, it's like, okay, well, you're supposed to denote if it's going to be a brainstorming topic. Is this a decision we need to make? Is this whatever your
you're
purpose
categorizing?
Exactly. So you categorize it. You kind of give it a time limit, like what you're looking for, like what you think we're going to have to, how much time you think we're going to need to discuss it. And if it's something that requires a decision or it's something a little more complex, you have to have a pre-read, typically 1 or 2 days before. You've got to have sort of share that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to engage with the content in a way that's going to be helpful for you.
And how do you do that? Slack or
Yes, I mean Google Suite, and then just remind folks to read it on Slack, etc.
Nice.
We take really kind of offline. People add notes to avoid the meeting becoming a bunch of updates. Everybody puts their written update into the doc.
Yeah.
And then pre-meeting, everyone reads the updates. Whatever questions you have on those updates, you can stick in the doc and add them to the agenda.
Is it all in a Google Doc?
All in a Google Doc, yeah.
Keep it simple.
And then we take notes during the meeting. We agree actions that need to happen as a result. We look at actions from last week. Have they happened? And that's kind of it.
Love it. I really want to jump into detail there because I've never actually asked that question before. I'm sure everyone has their own process. And then actions, how are they stored? Are they in a consistent or just in calendar?
No, it's actually just a list like Daniel to do X.
And how's that distributed?
So it's just for us for the 7 of us.
Within the calendar invite?
No. So it's in the Google Doc.
Okay.
So we just list out the actions in the Google Doc. And then, you're basically, if you have to involve other people, it's your job to kind of go out and involve other people. And then we check in the next week, like, did these things actually happen?
Mm-hmm.
If not, we move them to actions this week again.
Love it.
Last week. Yeah.
And then what about the kind of wider HR team?
Yeah, so we actually share a 1-pager of the outcome of the leadership meeting with the whole HR team.
Okay.
So we sort of want to keep them in the loop on what gets discussed in these meetings. And then we have an all hands with them every month. It used to be every 2 weeks. It was a bit overkill. So we moved it to once a month, which is usually a kind of how are we doing against our objectives type of thing. And a couple deep dives. So folks are doing interesting initiatives, want to talk about how those are going. So we do that. So these are the two cornerstones of the comms infrastructure. We also, every manager has one-on-ones with their directs, of course. A lot of the teams have their team meetings as well, which is on a weekly basis. And I also attend the senior leadership kind of meeting once a week.
Very efficient. What about managing performance? As I speak to my friends, peers, colleagues, and even me internally, personally, how have you been getting on in terms of managing performance
in a remote setting?
Yeah.
Look, again, I don't think it's any different. I think it's just about, it's just about being present as a leader, and I think, perhaps in the past, You could use attendance as a proxy, or just sort of be proximity.
Yeah, it's true. Even if just because they're in doesn't mean they're doing any work.
Exactly. So I think it actually has a forcing mechanism for leaders to just be a lot more
Have to.
Honest about how their people are doing. And so that's that to me is the key thing. So
I also, because I've seen like companies take it to the extreme. Like, my wife's company, I always pick on them, but I feel like it's crazy where like they measure the time people are logged in.
Yeah.
They measure, you have to kind of, in their system, I can't remember what it's called now, you have to share what you're doing every day. So, this is what I'm doing, and then it kind of gives, I think it has the opposite effect that they want. Definitely less engaged. I've been in situations where we need to make my daughter, who's 4, lunch, and Tasha's like, I need to make sure I'm logged in. Like, that's crazy. Like,
yeah, that's crazy.
Like, she's like, but it times out. If you don't press a number of keys, it times out. Yeah. It's like the most, and then it actually gives managers an excuse not to be as engaged as they should be, completely, and not have those conversations that they should be, and they become less and more disengaged. So it's actually the opposite effect of it. Whereas what you're talking about actually encourages more conversations, more communication. Totally. We talk through what we're doing. We don't need to have a KPI of how much you've done today.
Yes, I think look, for us at Vinted, we're very much sort of outcome focused, and output focused as well. I do like to have, so I don't believe in not having performance management systems. I do think that those are helpful, in particular as a mechanism to make sure that those feedback and development conversations do take place from
both
time
ways.
to time. Yeah. So for example, we have these like quarterly impact discussions, we call them, where basically we're effectively making the manager sit down with their direct report to have a conversation about how things are going.
But hopefully those are kind of more formal, but they should be having those conversations every day anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's kind of more like, okay, now we're actually going to put it in a formal setting, actually,
and it's not
track
even.
it.
It happens in the sort of course of their one-on-ones.
Yeah,
it's almost like just a reminder, like in case you're not talking about this all the time.
Yeah,
here's a nudge that you should definitely talk about it at least once a quarter.
But you're also going to map it back to activities like their own personal growth, leadership, and investing in them in terms of training, and it also goes back to your talent strategy in terms of where you see future talent, their development. That's not necessarily going to happen during those conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
In that way.
Exactly.
What about, I'd love to talk to you about kind of hiring, especially you've worked for multiple startups where you've had to attract senior leaders with experience, perhaps when you necessarily don't have the big brand name in the beginning, right? Because you're a startup just starting out. What are some of the strategies that you've employed to attract senior leaders or great talent to a business when you're not really a household name yet?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think you just have to me, it just goes back. You've got to tell the story. You have to, if you've got nothing to show in the past, you've got to tell a really compelling story of the future, right? So I think you have to have a very, very clear story of your mission. What is it that you're trying to achieve? How do you plan to get there? What is the contribution that this person is going to make to unlock that, right? I think I would say that you're going to have a hard time doing this if you don't authentically believe in your missions. I think every startup likes to have a mission, but
they write it down as part of their business plan. We have to write this down.
but I do think that if you are genuine about if you're genuine about sort of that mission, and it truly is what's driving the team toward execution, then I think you're already in a better spot. So that's kind of how I would start. I mean, I would invest a ton of time into getting the brief right. So the number of times I think these hires fail because you don't think through what you're looking for is just crazy to me.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So say you're hiring a a COO, right? I think you've got to be super clear on what the remit of this role is going to be. I think you'll be surprised that sometimes in startups, you ask 3 of the panelists and they all have a slightly different idea.
Also, to being a COO in a startup is very different to being a COO in a larger organization. Very different.
very, 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 very different. So I think you really have to be clear on like, what are the skills you need? What are the skills you may think you need, but actually you probably don't, because the team already carries that. And let's remember, you're building a team here and not just a collection of individuals. For example, right? So if you're, if I say CPO product leader, so chief product officer, you might think, well, they have to have really strong product vision. And maybe they do. But if your founder team are incredibly strong on vision, but actually lack the kind of discipline to organize a team toward that in terms of execution,
that's not gonna help.
Probably don't need to look for that vision spike, and you're unlikely to find that vision spike. So the execution kind of action orientation, organized analytical spike in the same person that has the vision spike. So you may want to actually very clearly spell out at the beginning of your hiring journey, like, typically a CPO other companies may look for a visionary CPO, but actually in our case, we don't want to do that. We want a operational CPO kind of thing. So have those conversations, align with folks on the team. That's really key in my opinion.
What are the key skills and attributes you feel like the leaders need in this day and age?
I mean, for me, and this really is just for every leader and really everyone, but like exponentially more important in leadership and especially in senior leadership, is self-awareness. It's the number one thing I would highlight. And it's self-awareness about what you're good at, what you're not good at, and what you do about the stuff that you're not good at. And I think there's many acceptable ways of dealing with that, right? So
what's your opinion on that? Because like you hear one side of people say you should double down on what you're good at, forget about what you're not good at. And then others, and I've heard other people say actually you should focus on your weaknesses and try and make them become strengths.
Well, I think there's a lot of ways of getting it right. Definitely, I mean, if you want to have a career that you enjoy, I probably would not encourage anyone to double down on their weaknesses, because
I don't mean double down. I mean just improve a little bit. Like,
but at the same time, I also completely, and this is why I feel a little bit sometimes like I'm not sure how I feel about personality testing, because people pigeonhole themselves into boxes, and they're like, and almost used as an excuse that, sorry, I'm not good at execution, I'm not good at numbers, and I'm just like,
convince yourself.
But and also it doesn't, if you're in a job, you've got to have the skills to do that job, and just because you're not naturally good at that thing, you should probably get to a level where you can at least deliver some of it. If you have the luxury of finding some other way of compensating for that weakness, great. I mean, I think as a senior leader, what you want to hear in an interview is they tell you, I'm, for example, really disorganized.
Me too. By the way,
there you go.
Shane will tell you that immediately, and and he's not. He's amazingly organized.
Exactly. So you guys are a great partnership, and that's what I'm talking about. So I think you find ways to.
We were intentional about that though. We sat down after the first year. It just didn't feel like we were making as much progress as we want. And when we sat down and kind of spoke about what gives us energy, what takes it away, and what our skills and weaknesses, we realized there were so many things that I were doing that he loved and I hated, and then vice versa. And we're like, and then as soon as we lent into our strengths and things that give us energy,
brilliant,
game changer.
There you go,
absolute game changer. He was like, Chris, I hate doing sales. I'm like, I love doing sales. And it was just, so I definitely recommend it. You sit down and have that conversation, do that.
That's amazing. And I'm fully with you. I think it's so you can choose to kind of get better at that thing if that's what you want to do, or that's your strategy, or you can choose to compensate for it by hiring a team that does that part better than you, or having a partner, or and this doesn't work in life, etc.
It's a good answer that I get a lot actually from a lot of the CHROs, because when I interviewing, who was I interviewing? Oh, I was interviewing Lauren Schuster, who's the Chief People Officer for Lego.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked him around some questions around people analytics, some quite technical questions. And he was like, this is why I have Melissa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He's like, I don't need to be, he's like, I don't need to be an expert on people analytics. And,
I love that.
And he was like, and then Melissa was there actually. And then I had the question, and it was just a really like one of those moments of, yeah, that's why he hires an incredible team around him, because he doesn't have to be, he shouldn't be the expert in everything.
Yeah.
That's something I learned the hard way for a long time, trying to have all the answers as a leader, as a CEO. I was like, no, that's the whole point of having a great team.
So I would say that's the number one thing that I really look for in
self-aware.
leaders. Yeah.
Well, one of the great ways to become self-aware is having a culture of psychological safety, so people can give you feedback.
Yeah.
As well. Like the amount of times that CHROs come to our events face to face, I realize this is the first time they're really getting feedback because they maybe don't have a team or the type of environment where they're getting it. But when there's 50 or 100 other CHROs in the room, they will give you feedback during the round tables. And they've been like, Chris, this was great. I got so much feedback today.
That's great.
On my project. And I was like, that kind of is a clear signal that you probably need to have a conversation with your team who are not giving you that feedback. And I learned the hard way. My coach did a 360 with my team, and all of the feedback I got, I was like, really? All of these things? We all have that as managers. When we get our feedback, we're like, really? And that just sent a clear signal that, okay, perhaps I don't have as much.
It's so funny because I feel like we it's so difficult to you always feel like you're creating the circumstances for people to be able to speak up. But actually what I find is that you really have to proactively ask.
Yeah,
right?
It's not just going to happen.
If no matter how, that act of asking is actually the only act that
it's a signal that you want to receive it, right?
Yeah.
Like anyone listening right now, when was the last time that you asked for feedback? It's a good question to ask ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Most of us, including me, was quite a while ago.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't do it enough now that I think about it. So go on, good
lesson for everyone listening right now. Well, listen, before I let you go, I'm going to jump into our quick fire round.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm going to ask you some questions, but you've only got 30 seconds.
Cool.
Let's answer. Hobbies and passions outside of the office.
Gym, mudlarking.
What's that?
I go down to the Thames Foreshore, look for historical finds that people have chucked into the river.
No way, because obviously when the tide comes out, you got all the mud. Oh, it is mud in the Thames.
There's a whole community of people doing this. You find golden coins, you find Roman stuff, you find everything. It's amazing.
Yeah, the things that are around in the Thames, I can only imagine.
Yeah,
as well. So it's called mudlarking.
Mudlarking, yeah.
Okay, I've seen people doing it. Obviously, I've lived in London my whole life. I never knew what it was called.
There you go.
All right, there we go. If you could click your fingers and change one thing about HR, what would you change?
I would give it an even better PR turnaround. I would want
better name. Don't call it HR.
All the smartest people in the world to come work in HR.
Yeah. I see.
Yeah. So I would just want to accelerate that journey of it being a really attractive place for smart people.
Love that. How would your friends and family describe what you do for a living?
Well, my mom would say I work for some sort of online secondhand shop. And she actually worked in HR in the past.
Oh, did she?
She'd say...
So she knows.
She knows.
Oh, all right. That's very rare. That's normally, that's not the answer that we get.
Yeah.
What legacy do you want to leave behind?
Hopefully making work better. Just, I would love for people to leave Vinted feeling like they had freaking good time. They learned a ton. It was a career slingshot for them, and then they're going to go and do even better things with their lives. So it's kind of
I think we all hope for that. If you wasn't doing the job you're in now, what would you think you'd be doing?
I think I might be
looking for gold on the beach.
Well, I was going to say I'm obsessed with history, so I might.
Oh, really? Okay, that's a good link.
History professor.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
What's your favorite era in history?
2nd century Rome.
It's fascinating. Yeah, we could do a whole other show about that. But yeah, that was a fascinating time. Who'd say is the person who had the biggest impact on your career?
Probably my current boss, Thomas, who took a chance on me and is an incredibly inspiring leader that I really look up to. So,
I mean, what would you say is the main things you've learned from him?
Humility. No matter how successful you are, stay humble and listen. Psychological safety, which I think is very much related to the first point. So double down on building that in your team. Those would be the key.
Well, those two things combined are very powerful.
Yeah.
As well. Last question. What advice would you give to the HR leaders, CPOs of tomorrow that are going to be sitting in your seat one day? I love the way to take a deep breath there.
Yeah.
Like, oh God.
Okay. Well, I would say it really depends on your context. So I think it would be almost reckless to give advice, but I would say like, if you have a lot of hiring ahead of you, so you're at some stage and you've raised some funding and now you're going to hire a bunch of people, like really make sure you get that piece right. Because if you focus on everything else and you kind of let hiring fall by the wayside and you make poor hiring, like poor quality decisions in the hiring process, and you build a team that not just for the people team, but for the whole company that aren't right, I think you could really derail your company. So get the hiring piece of the puzzle right first before you figure out what to do with everything else.
Yeah, because unless you have the right people and skills, the rest doesn't matter. It's not going to happen.
Exactly.
Well, listen, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And I said to you before, I should have said this during the show, like so many of our employees love Vinted. They're on there buying, selling. You clearly got a good connection.
Great.
You clearly got a great connection with your audience as well, because we're all hearing about it at home. So wish you and the team all the success. And I
Thank you
appreciate
so much. That's great to hear. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for having me.